The harmattan wind, usually a bearer of dry comfort, carried a different kind of chill through Umuis. It was a chill born not of the weather, but of the unspoken, a pervasive silence that settled over the village like a shroud. John, barely 24 and fresh from his university studies in the bustling city of Lagos, felt it acutely. He had returned to Umuez, his ancestral home, seeking solace and the familiar rhythm of village life, but instead found a disquieting undercurrent, a tension that hummed beneath every polite greeting and every shared meal. Umuiz was beautiful, nestled amidst rolling hills and fertile plains, its red earth paths winding between mud brick homes and vibrant market stalls. Yet, beneath this picturesque facade lay a history shrouded in whispers, whispers of sudden disappearances, unexplained misfortunes, and a prosperity that seemed to have sprung from tragedy. The elders, their faces etched with the wisdom of years, would often fall silent when certain names were mentioned, or when conversations veered too close to events of 3 generations past. John, with the inquisitive mind of a scholar, found this silence more deafening than any noise. His grandmother, the late Mama Neka, had been the first to plant the seed of curiosity. Before her passing, she would sometimes drift into cryptic pronouncements, her eyes distant. "The land remembers, my son," she'd murmur, her voice raspy. "And the earth, it drinks deeply." John, then a boy, had dismissed them as the ramblings of old age. Now they echoed with a chilling resonance. One sweltering afternoon, sorting through his grandmother's belongings, John stumbled upon a small, intricately carved wooden box hidden beneath a pile of faded wrappers. Inside, nestled amongst dried herbs and cowrie shells, was a brittle, yellowed parchment. It wasn't a letter, but a fragmented map, crudely drawn with symbols John didn't recognize, and a prominent X marked near the ancient Ogbunika caves. A place forbidden to the villagers for reasons no one could clearly articulate beyond vague tales of spirits. Tucked beside it was a tarnished silver locket containing a faded photograph of a stern-faced man John didn't recognize, and a single dried kola nut, split in a peculiar way. His heart pounded. This was it. This was the first thread of the unravelling. He showed the map to his father, Papa Emeka, a respected farmer and a man of few words. Papa Emeka's usually calm demeanour fractured. His eyes widened, a flicker of fear passing through them before he quickly composed himself. "This is nothing, John." "Old superstitions. Forget it." The urgency in his voice, the almost desperate plea, only solidified John's resolve. His mother, Mama Ngozi, usually the more expressive of the two, also grew unusually quiet, her gaze distant and troubled. John's questions began subtly. He visited Elder Obinna, the oldest man in Umuis, whose memory was said to be as long as the Niger River. Elder Obinna, his eyes cloudy with age, listened patiently. When John mentioned the Ogbunika caves and the old map, the elder's hand trembled as he reached for his snuff-box. "Some secrets, my son," he rasped, "are best left undisturbed. The earth has a way of claiming those who dig too deep." His words were a warning, not a dismissal. The very next day, a series of unsettling events began. A stray dog, usually friendly, snarled viciously at John outside his compound. His bicycle, left unlocked for years without incident, was found with its tyres slashed. Small things, easily dismissed as coincidence, but John's instincts screamed otherwise. He felt eyes on him, a prickling sensation on his neck, even in the bustling market. The silence of Umuis was no longer peaceful. It was watchful. John knew he needed to be more discreet. He spent hours in the village library, a small, dusty room filled with forgotten texts and old newspapers. He searched for records of land disputes, chieftaincy battles, anything that might connect to the Ogbunika caves or unexplained wealth. He found an old local newspaper clipping from nearly 60 years ago, detailing the sudden disappearance of a prominent landowner, Chief Okorocha, whose vast farmlands bordered the very caves. The article mentioned no foul play, only that he had vanished, leaving his estate to a distant cousin, the ancestor of the current Chief Okoro. A chill ran down John's spine. Chief Okorocha was the man in the locket's photograph. He sought out Auntie Chica, his father's older sister, known for her sharp memory and love of gossip. He casually brought up Chief Okorocha. Auntie Chica's usual effervescence dimmed. "Ah, that was a sad time," she said, her voice hushed. "A good man, Chief Okorocha. Vanished without a trace. Some say he angered the spirits of the caves." But the way her eyes darted around, as if fearful of being overheard, told John there was more to the story than spirits. That night, John heard hushed voices from his parents' room. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, fearful. He knew they were talking about him, about his newfound obsession. The next morning his mother, her face drawn, pleaded with him. "John, my son, please. Focus on your future, on finding a good job. This past, it is not for you." Her eyes, usually so warm, held a deep, pleading terror he had never seen before. He ignored their pleas. The fragmented map, the newspaper clipping, the locket, they were pieces of a puzzle he was compelled to solve. He decided to visit the Ogboniki caves, despite the warnings. He packed a small bag telling his parents he was going to visit a friend in a neighbouring village. The path to the caves was overgrown, rarely used. The air grew heavy, humid, as he approached. The entrance, a gaping maw in the earth, seemed to breathe a cold, damp air. As he ventured deeper, the darkness enveloped him, broken only by the beam of his flashlight. He followed the crude markings on his grandmother's map, deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels. He found what the map indicated: a hidden chamber, smaller than the others, almost completely concealed by rockfalls. Inside, his flashlight beam revealed not ancient artifacts, but something far more shocking. Scrawled on the damp cave wall, almost faded by time, were symbols he now recognized from his history books. A crude representation of a mineral, columbite, known to be valuable. And beneath it, a chilling inscription in Old Igbo: "Okorocha's blood stains this earth, for the wealth of Umueze and the greed of the few." His blood ran cold. This wasn't about spirits, this was about murder, and a valuable mineral that had brought prosperity to some, at a terrible cost. He realized the X on the map wasn't a treasure spot, but a grave site. Chief Okorocha hadn't vanished. He had been silenced, murdered for his land, for the columbite beneath it. The wealth of Umuz, the sudden rise of certain families, began to make horrifying sense. As he turned to leave, a shadow detached itself from the deeper recesses of the cave. A figure, tall and imposing, blocked his path. John's heart leaped into his throat. He wasn't alone. The figure in the cave moved with a predatory grace. John instinctively recoiled, his flashlight beam wavering. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling despite his efforts to sound brave. The figure said nothing, but a glint of metal caught the light. A machete. John knew this wasn't a warning anymore. This was an execution. He scrambled back, his mind racing. He knew the caves were a maze, but he had studied the map, memorized the twists and turns. He ducked into a narrow crevice, the machete scraping against the rock where his head had been moments before. The air grew thick with the metallic scent of fear. He could hear the heavy footsteps, the ragged breathing closing in. He was trapped. Just as the figure cornered him, a sudden tremor shook the cave. A cascade of loose rocks fell, creating a temporary barrier between John and his pursuer. It was a stroke of luck, or perhaps, as his grandmother might have said, the earth itself intervened. He seized the opportunity, scrambling through the newly formed opening, tearing through the darkness, not stopping until he burst out into the blinding sunlight, gasping for air. He didn't look back. He ran, fueled by terror and a chilling new understanding. The unknown people were very real, and they were deadly. Back in the relative safety of his compound, John locked himself in his room, his hands still shaking. He knew now that the secret wasn't just old history. It was a live, dangerous entity, actively guarded. The inscription on the cave wall, "For the wealth of Umuez and the greed of the few," echoed in his mind. The wealth of the village, the prosperity that had bypassed many but enriched a select few, was built on blood. He began to connect the dots to the second generation. Chief Okoro, the current village head, was the grandson of the man who had inherited Chief Okorocha's land. His family, the Okoro clan, had risen to prominence and immense wealth over the decades. They controlled the largest farmlands, the most lucrative trade routes, and now, John suspected, the silent operation of the Columbite mine hidden deep within the Ogbunika caves. He recalled stories of Chief Okoro's father, a man known for his ruthless business dealings and his uncanny ability to silence dissent. There were rumours, always dismissed as baseless gossip, of rivals disappearing, of land disputes ending abruptly with the sudden death of the opposition. The pattern was horrifyingly clear. The secret had been passed down, not just as a burden, but as a legacy of power and privilege to be protected at all costs. John started observing the powerful families in Umueze, the Okoros, the Nwabuzors, the Ezudus. They were the pillars of the community, the ones who sponsored festivals, built schools, and donated to the church. But beneath their philanthropy, John now saw a network of complicity, their wealth intertwined with the generations-old crime. He noticed how their children, his peers, seemed to float through life with an ease born of inherited privilege, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant of the dark foundation beneath them. He knew he couldn't confront them directly. He needed irrefutable proof, something more than a fading inscription and old rumours. He remembered his grandmother's fragmented map. If there was a map, there might be other documents, ledgers, anything that detailed the original crime and its beneficiaries. He needed to find out who else was involved, who were the few mentioned in the cave. His investigation became a clandestine operation. He spent nights poring over old land deeds at the local government office, bribing a clerk with a small sum. He visited the homes of distant relatives, pretending to gather family history, subtly probing for information about the past. He learned that the original beneficiaries of Chief Okorocha's disappearance were not just one family, but a small cabal of influential men who had formed a pact, swearing to secrecy and sharing the ill-gotten gains. Their descendants, now the third generation, continued this pact, their lives intertwined by the dark secret. The danger escalated. He received an anonymous letter, a single line scrawled in red ink, "Stop digging, or you will join the others." His phone was tapped. He could hear faint echoes during calls. He knew he was being watched, constantly. The fear was a cold knot in his stomach, but the injustice, the sheer audacity of the cover-up, fueled his defiance. He was no longer just curious, he was driven by a burning need for truth and justice. The most shocking revelation came not from dusty archives or hushed conversations, but from within the very walls of his home. John had been meticulously cross-referencing names from old land records with the family trees of the prominent clans. He noticed a recurring name, a signature on several documents related to the transfer of Chief Okorocha's land, a signature that bore an uncanny resemblance to his own grandfather's. It was a name he had dismissed initially, thinking it a common surname. But the distinct flourish of the signature, the particular slant of the J in Jidiofor, was unmistakable. His grandfather, Papa Jidiofor, a man he had only known through stories of quiet dignity and unwavering integrity, was listed as a witness, and subtly, a minor beneficiary in the initial land transfer. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His own grandfather? How could this be? He remembered his grandmother's cryptic words, "The land remembers, and the earth it drinks deeply." Was she hinting at their own family's involvement? He confronted his mother, Mama Ngozi, one evening, carefully, tentatively. "Mama," he began, "I found some old papers. Grandfather Gideofor, he was involved in Chief Okorocha's land dealings, wasn't he?" Mama Ngozi's face drained of colour. Her hands, busy shelling groundnuts, stilled. Her eyes, usually so expressive, became vacant, filled with a deep, ancient sorrow. "John," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Some truths are too heavy to bear." Then his father, Papa Emeka, walked in. His presence, usually a source of calm, now seemed to radiate a quiet tension. He looked at Mama Ngozi, a silent communication passing between them. "Your grandfather, John," Papa Emeka said, his voice low and strained, "was a young man then. He was coerced, forced into a pact he never wanted. They threatened his family, his livelihood. He was a witness, yes, but also a victim of circumstance." The truth, however, was far more complex. John pressed them gently at first, then with growing urgency. He showed them the fragmented map, the newspaper clipping, the inscription from the cave. Slowly, painfully, the story unravelled. His grandfather, Gideofor, had indeed been one of the younger men drawn into the conspiracy by the powerful elders of that era, including the ancestor of Chief Okoro. They had discovered the columbite on Chief Okorocha's land and, consumed by greed, had orchestrated his murder, making it look like a disappearance. Gideofor, then a promising young scholar, had been blackmailed into forging documents and providing alibis. He was given a small share of the initial proceeds, enough to lift his family out of poverty, but forever binding him to the secret. He had lived with the guilt, passing the burden of silence to his son, Papa Emeka, who in turn had inherited the fear and the unspoken pact. "We lived in fear, John," Mama Ngozi confessed, tears streaming down her face. "Fear that the truth would come out, fear that the enforcers would silence us too. Your father, he tried to break free, but the web was too strong. They threatened us, your siblings, even you when you were a baby." The enforcers were not just shadowy figures. They were a secret society formed by the original conspirators. Their ranks replenished each generation, ensuring the secret's survival. They were men and women from within the prominent families, some even holding respected positions in the community, their loyalty bought with wealth and power, their ruthlessness honed by decades of protecting the lie. John felt a wave of nausea. His own home, the very foundation of his life, was tainted by this generational crime. The comfort he sought in Umwez had been a facade. The people he loved, his parents, were not just victims of circumstance, but complicit, forced to maintain the silence to protect their own. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical threat. He understood now why his parents had been so desperate for him to stop, why his grandmother had spoken in riddles. They carried the weight of the secret, the fear of its exposure, and the guilt of their own unwilling participation. "Who are they, Mama? Who are these enforcers now?" John asked, his voice raw. Mama Ngozi looked at Papa Emeka, who finally spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. "They are everywhere, John. Some you know, some you respect. They are the ones who benefit most from the silence." He listed names that made John's blood run cold. Chief Okoro, his cousin, a prominent businessman, even the respected head of the village market. The web was far more extensive than he had imagined. John realized he was not just fighting a secret, he was fighting an entire system, a deeply entrenched network of power, greed, and fear. He had almost lost his life, not just to the unknown people, but to the very legacy he was born into. The truth was a dangerous weapon, and he was now holding it alone, against a formidable, invisible enemy. The weight of his family's involvement, the knowledge that his own bloodline was intertwined with the decades-long deceit, fueled John's resolve. He was no longer just an investigator, he was an avenger, seeking not just truth, but justice for Chief Okorocha and all those who had been silenced. He knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. He confided in his closest friend, Obi, a sharp-witted journalist working in the city who had always encouraged John's pursuit of truth. Obi, horrified by the revelations, immediately offered his help. "This is bigger than Umuez, John," Obi said, his voice grim. "This is a story that needs to be told, for all the world to hear." Together they meticulously gathered evidence. John used his knowledge of the village and its hidden paths, while Obi, with his journalistic skills, helped organize the fragmented information, cross-reference names, and strategize their next move. They found more old documents, hidden in obscure church records and forgotten land registries, detailing the illicit transfer of land and the sudden acquisition of wealth by the conspirators. They even managed to get a sample of the columbite from the Ogbuniki caves, confirming its presence and value. The enforcers sensed John's renewed determination. The threats escalated. His car tires were not just slashed, but the brake lines were tampered with. A fire broke out in his small study, destroying some of his research notes, but thankfully not the core evidence he had already digitized and sent to Obi. John knew they were closing in, desperate to silence him permanently. He moved out of his family home, fearing for his parents' safety, and went into hiding in a small rented room on the outskirts of a nearby town, maintaining contact with Obi only through secure channels. The climax arrived during the annual Umuez Harvest Festival, a time when the entire community gathered, including all the prominent families. John and Obi decided this was their opportunity. They couldn't go to the police yet. The network of corruption was too deep, and they feared their evidence would be suppressed. They needed to expose the truth publicly, to shame the perpetrators and force their hand. Obi, disguised as a visiting journalist, managed to secure a spot to speak at the festival, ostensibly to report on the village's prosperity. As he began his speech, John, cloaked and hidden amongst the crowd, activated a small portable projector he had secretly set up. Images flashed onto a makeshift screen behind Obi: the faded photograph of Chief Okorocha, the fragmented map, the chilling inscription from the cave, copies of the forged land deeds, and finally, geological reports confirming the columbite. Obi's voice, amplified by a small speaker, boomed across the gathering. "For generations," he declared, "the prosperity of Umueze has been built on a lie. On the blood of Chief Okorocha, murdered for his land, for the precious columbite beneath it." He detailed the conspiracy, naming the original perpetrators and their descendants, the very men and women sitting in the front rows, their faces now pale with shock and fury. He spoke of the enforcers, the secret society that had terrorized the village, silencing anyone who dared to seek the truth. A hush fell over the crowd, then a ripple of murmurs, growing into an uproar. The accused, led by Chief Okoro, tried to shout him down, to dismiss him as a madman, but John, stepping out from the shadows, his face grim but resolute, held up the silver locket with Chief Okorocha's faded image. "This is the man whose blood paved your roads, built your mansions," he cried, his voice ringing with conviction. "His spirit cries for justice." Chaos erupted. Some villagers, long suspicious, began to murmur in agreement. Others, loyal to the powerful families, tried to defend them, but the evidence, projected for all to see, was undeniable. The weight of generations of silence was finally breaking. The consequences were swift and brutal for those involved. The immediate aftermath saw Chief Okoro and his closest associates, the core of the enforcers. Arrested by a special police unit, Obi had secretly alerted, ensuring they couldn't be influenced by local corruption. The evidence John and Obi had meticulously gathered was overwhelming. The columbite mine, long secretly exploited, was seized by the government, its proceeds now promised to the community. For John's family, the consequences were different, more personal. His parents, though not directly involved in the murders, faced the shame of their complicity, the burden of their silence. They were ostracized by some, pitied by others. The wealth they had accumulated, a small fraction of the illicit gains, was scrutinized, and they faced legal repercussions for their role in the cover-up, albeit lesser ones than the main perpetrators. Their home, once a sanctuary, became a symbol of the village's painful past. The Umuez community was shattered, then slowly began to heal. The truth, though painful, was a cleansing fire. The innocent who had suffered under the shadow of the secret finally found peace. The land, once stained by blood and greed, could finally begin to remember its true history and perhaps truly heal. John, though scarred by the experience and forever changed by the betrayal he uncovered, had brought light to the darkness. He had paid a heavy price, but the truth, finally revealed, was a legacy far more valuable than any hidden treasure. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment below to tell us what you think about the story.